Sometimes the best gardening advice doesn't come from a book.
Comes from other gardeners who've tried and then failed at something until they got it right. Renee Bonneau goes in the garden now for some neat ideas you can sink your shovel into.
We're in the garden of master gardener Betty Lentz, and she's showing us some tips and tricks to use in the garden. Betty, we will start with interplanting. What is that?
Interplanting is planting two crops either very close together, because one you know is going to be a cool season crop. It's going to be done by July. And the other crop that's planted close to it is something that's really going to start growing about in July and take over the space. That's one way to do it. Another way of doing it is actually planting two things together, and that would be like radishes and carrots. Radishes go quickly. They have to have cool weather. Once it gets the least bit warm, they are going to bolt, they're going to go to seed, and they're done.
Now, Betty, I noticed something in your garden that looks like it doesn't belong there. Can you explain the newspaper?
I'm using the newspaper as a mulch under my tomatoes this year. Newspapers are free. They do the job of mulching, which is to keep the weeds down, to preserve the moisture in the soil when it gets hot. And in the case of tomatoes, the tomato diseases are in the soil. So if you could keep the soil from splashing up and contacting the leaves on the tomato, you're going to cut down on your tomato diseases.
Betty, a handy tip for the fall is using things around the yard to put over your garden beds.
Right. And what I do is, instead of raking my leaves in the fall, I just vacuum them up and I make a layer about 3 inches deep on the garden. Just layer that on, let that sit all winter, and by spring it started to decompose enough that I can just till it into the soil. It's really important to keep adding every year organic matter to your soil. That's one easy way to do it.
Betty, thanks so much for letting us in your garden and for giving us some helpful tips. And of course, Betty did have one more trick for you, and that's going to other gardening websites and getting a little bit more advice. You could do that by going onto our website, 12.tv, and click on In the Garden. You'll find those links there. In Maple Grove and in the garden, Renee Bonneau, 12 News.